the sake of the conversion of that person, we try to change them and convert them so that they don't continue. Right? So the church doesn't say you have to lay down and be a doormat. It's one thing, okay, for a time or 2 or 3 or so forth that you're forgiving and try to work with, say it's a spouse or a friend or whatever, but that it doesn't, you're not called to continue that. And especially for the sake of helping change the other person. Right? Because that's also, now some saints have suffered and offered that up, and the other person has converted. Many saints, Queen Elizabeth of Portugal, Elizabeth of Hungary with her family, and many saints or holy people who have gone before us. But I just want to point that out, that if something is too much, too severe, too unreasonable, ungodly, we're not bound to continue like that. We should step away or separate or try to stop that in some way. Okay? But if we're able to suffer something, we can offer that and win many graces for them. And again, I bet Pope John Paul's priest friend didn't think or want to die in this way or figure that this would be his cross. He probably never thought that. But that's the way that Christ invited him to enter into the mystery of his suffering and became a saint. Many times we're inspired by saints, by those who suffered. St. Therese of Lisieux, she hated cheese to the point that she would vomit. And she was in a Carmelite cloister, and they were, silent many times. And you ate what was put before you, and they had very little food. And so whenever she choked it down, and then she'd try to hide, she was like involuntarily kind of vomiting, and sometimes she had to run from the table to go vomit. She hated cheese. And so when she was dying, but she never showed it, she always tried to hide it as best she could, and not complain. And when she was dying, in their convent, they have the practice that the sister can have whatever favor she would like when she's died. Whatever, maybe a favorite food. They had a simple life, so they didn't have very much. There wasn't like a flyer to Disney or something like that, which didn't exist. But her favorite request. So they're standing there, and Therese is close to death, and the one sister says, "Oh, I know. She loves cheese," and she ran and got her cheese. When she's dying, and her body can't stand it. And that's what she was doing. Cheese. Humans. God's got a sense of humor. The suffering of Blessed Mother Teresa for 50 years, she had no consolation, no spiritual consolation from God, period. No consolation. Interiorly. And you would never know that. She served joyfully. She served the poor, the hungry. She picked them off the street. She poured herself, she racked her body. She was ugly because she poured herself out so much. All full of wrinkles. Her feet, her toes were all curved out. She was just wow. And yet she was always filled with joy. But she her spiritual director actually wrote about this after her death. It came out with this. That for 50 years she suffered from aridity or dryness of soul. And yet she continued to pray, she continued to go to God, especially prayed much and often. She got up an hour before the other sisters who got up about 4:30 in the morning. She'd get up an hour before that and pray for a whole hour before they prayed again for an hour and then had Mass and went to their hospice. She poured herself out. Why? Because God was making her feel what the people she was picking out of the gutter felt, so that she could identify, and so that they who were suffering could look at her and realize she understands my suffering. When we've suffered something, we understand. I, as a priest, have many funerals, and all my priesthood, I always try to be as consoling and loving in that time of death and dying with the family. But never was I more understanding than when my brother died. After that point, when my brother died, without cause, there's no cause of death, in the middle of the night, and totally unexpectedly, at the age of 44. And I did his funeral. And never did I more understand course, it kind of stood out. He had had a conversion now, and he still had his long hair, and he was recovered from drinking. But anyway, he stopped me out. We had a great conversation. But he said to me, he says, the ward of the hospital, they'll call me before even social workers. He wasn't a professional or anything. But he hit rock bottom, and he knew what it was like. And he goes in the room, and I have nothing against social workers, and he didn't either. But he's just saying, this is the point, is that he'd go in the room, and he'd say, look, this is the way it is. You're going to hit rock bottom. Your life is going to be a disaster. You're not going to be happy. And he would have more success with those people. Why? Because they could see in him his conviction. He had been there and come back. Conviction, because he had suffered it himself. Christ has suffered it himself. Passion, rejection, ridicule, lying, death itself. He's been there and done that, brothers and sisters. He knows by experience, experiential knowledge. We can't say, God, you don't know. And he says, yes, I do. I know by experience. And I'll be with you. I'll walk with you. I'll suffer with you. I'll carry the cross with you. And then many other saints were inspired by them. Saint Faustina, who's a religious sister, and she was sick, but every time she went to the doctor, they had no diagnosis, so the other sisters thought she was faking it, so they teased her and laughed her, whispered her, when she walked by. And she was truly sick, but it never showed. So they thought she was a fake. And yet she was the greatest mystic of our time. Always speaking to Jesus and Blessed Mother and having appearances and so forth. She never said a word. We're always inspired by those saints, aren't we? Look at they suffered. Look what happened to them. But when it happens to us, by this face or that person, oh, well, wait a minute. Can you believe what they said? Look how they mistreated me. We do that all the time. We don't offer it up. We don't roll our tongue. We don't not complain as they did. We're inspired by them, but when it comes to us, in the real, the particulars, we point fingers, we blame, we get mad, we get vengeful. It's very difficult. Look what they did. Look how I'm mistreated. We defend ourselves, we gossip about them, we retaliate or whatever else. Instead of realizing the cross that Jesus is holding out to us to carry and to take up, embracing it with his help and grace, and being thankful. Have you thanked Jesus for your cross today? Have you thanked Jesus for your cross today? Because it's